This is a special edition of 10 News First.
Good evening. The federal government is off and running, selling Josh Frydenberg's first ever budget that's barely a few hours old. Scott Morrison is banking on it to get him re-elected, and that, of course, is the catch. None of this will ever see the light of day if the government is thrown out of office next month. The headlines are two-pronged. There is a $7.1 billion surplus and $158 billion in personal income tax, which benefit the rich far more than low-income earners. Network political editor Peter Van Onselen and National Affairs editor Hugh Riminton are in Canberra. They join me now. First to you, Peter. Those numbers are sure to get people's attention, but are they real or just a mirage?
Well, the surplus is real enough. I mean, this is not like Wayne Swan's promised surplus that was never going to materialise. It's for the next financial year, and it will happen no matter who wins the next election. But the most important issue here, Sandra, is what you mentioned off the top. Normally, when you get a budget, you pore over it as a consumer of what the government might be offering because it affects your life. That's not so relevant here if the coalition doesn't win the next election. Where they sit on the polls suggests that they won't win the next election. But having said that, this budget has been framed to try to turn that around.
Tonight, I announce that the budget is back in the black and Australia is back on track.
Yes, it's finally here, the long-awaited surplus. Well, next financial year anyway.
For the first time in 12 years, our nation is again paying its own way.
In his first budget, new Treasurer Josh Frydenberg handed down a $7.1 billion surplus, as well as three more across the forward estimates.
Only one side of politics can do this because only one side of politics has done this.
The total? $45 billion to help pay down the national debt, which, by the way, has doubled since the coalition came to power. The centrepiece of tonight's budget? Tax cuts. In fact, the Treasurer used the word tax 44 times in his speech.
Taxes, 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 tax cuts.
A sure sign this is where they want to fight Labor.
We are the party of lower taxes.
But for who? By the time the full suite of tax cuts have taken effect, someone earning $35,000 gets just $255 as a tax cut. Someone earning $200,000? Over $11,000.
We want Australians to have a go and we want Australians to get a fair go.
Combined with what wasn't in the budget, such as an increase in the New Start allowance, it's likely Labor won't support the huge tax cuts for high-income earners, setting up a class war election.
The Treasurer announced a remarkably flat tax schedule in tonight's budget. In 5 years' time, everyone earning from $45,000 to $200,000 will pay the same flat rate of 30%.
Don't forget the handouts to help with energy bills leaked before tonight, $75 for singles and $125 for couples, go to 4 million low-income earners, including pensioners, but not to anyone on New Start. The biggest spending within the budget? On infrastructure.
The coalition government is boosting our infrastructure spending to $100 billion over the decade.
That $100 billion has been splashed right around the country, giving the government lots to crow about as it chases votes. What was closest to the Treasurer's heart in this, his first budget?
Something that I feel very passionate about is youth suicide and mental health. There's a big package in there for that.
The government hopes that tonight's budget will firmly put the focus on economic management. But the lack of fairness in tax cuts, which heavily favour the wealthy, won't go down well in outer metropolitan marginal seats. 4 Treasurers since Peter Costello haven't managed to get the budget back in the black. One lived in hope.
The 4 years of surpluses I announced tonight are a powerful endorsement of the strength.
You've been the Finance Minister across 3 Treasurers that have handed down budgets. How do you rank them?
This has been a team effort over 6 years with 3 outstanding Treasurers.
The 5th Treasurer finally got there tonight. Well, maybe. Well, I tell you what, I certainly do think that they will get some credit for returning the budget to surplus, but the tax cuts, which are so much more favourable for the wealthy, I think Bill Shorten in his budget reply on Thursday, he is going to jump all over that, Sandra.
Well, watch it. OK, Peter, thank you. We will, of course, hear about this budget every single day from now right up until polling day. So to Hugh Riminton now. Hugh, you've just spoken to the Treasurer, who in no small part has the fate of the government in his hands.
He absolutely does, Sandra. He's pretty much their best hope just at the moment. If they do lose governments just in a few weeks with the election coming up in May, this will very likely to be the only federal budget that Josh Frydenberg ever hands down. But he reckons he's come up with a good one. I spoke with him just a short time ago. Treasurer, thank you very much for your time.
Good to be with you.
You've got to a surplus. Congratulations. Or we've nearly got to a surplus. Are you 100% sure this one will actually be delivered?
Absolutely. This is a very credible number, $7.1 billion. And what's important is that we have under-promised and over-delivered with our previous budget forecasts. And we've seen a steady trajectory downwards in terms of deficits, including for 18-19, which was better than was forecast at MyEFO. And now this number of $7.1 billion is the first of surpluses going forward that will see all of Commonwealth debt, net debt, paid off by the end of the decade.
So coal has been good to you. Coal and iron ore has kicked up with some nice little returns.
Well, it's all relative because when Labor was promising surpluses that weren't delivered, they were relying on $175 iron ore prices. We've got in our budget $55 iron ore prices, and we've been very conservative with our estimates. What we have seen is the economy strengthened by more people being in jobs, Hugh. Over 1.2 million people finding work, and the number of people on welfare who are of working age as a proportion has come down to its lowest level in 30 years. So it's the product of disciplined decision-making, more people in work, and obviously sound fiscal management.
Tax cuts obviously lie at the heart of this budget.
Sure.
You're not going to try to rush through any legislation, even though Labor says that they would have supported your first tranche of tax cuts.
This is one package of measures, even though it occurs over two separate timeframes. You've got the extension of what is called the low and middle income tax offset, which will see someone earning between $48,000 and $90,000, for example, get $1,080 in their pocket in just 13 weeks' time.
This means what you're basically saying is you're taking this to the people. You're saying to the people, vote for us, you'll get $1,000 back in just a few weeks if you're on 90,000.
And what's more, we're saying you're also going to get a structural change, which comes in 24-25, which will see the 32.5 cents in the dollar tax bracket fall to 30 cents in the dollar. So anyone earning between $45,000 and $200,000 will pay no more than 30 cents in the dollar. This is a big benefit.
So let's talk about that, because the benefits there skew towards the rich. If you've got a family with two couples, each making $200,000, they're going to get a lot more, $23,000 in tax cuts under that scheme. If you're a family making just $60,000, you're going to get $500. Well, that surely is benefiting the wealthy.
Well, actually, no, because this policy maintains the progressive nature of our system. So under our changes, someone earning $45,000 will pay 1/10 of the tax of someone earning $200,000. And even when our tax plan is fully rolled out, you'll have the top 5% of taxpayers paying 1/3 of the overall tax take. In fact, that actually strengthens through our project.
But this is about tax cuts, and you'd surely agree that tax cuts benefit disproportionately the people up towards $200,000 compared with those at the bottom.
Not if you're looking at the percentage of the cut as a proportion of the overall tax being paid. And that's the key point here. At the same time, Hugh, we're focused on the simplification and the structural reform that will see 95% of taxpayers better off and paying no more than 30 cents in the dollar.
If there's one thing in this budget that will make people vote for the coalition to be returned to office, what is it?
Well, obviously, it's tax relief, it's congestion-busting infrastructure, but something that's really singularly important to me through this budget is the package of measures to tackle youth suicide and mental health. Perinatal support, early psychosis treatment, 30 new headspace centres, eating into the waiting lists with more resources, specific peer support for Indigenous kids.
There's a lot of things.
There's a lot of things in a very big package that will save a life.
You have a busy few weeks ahead of you, Treasurer. Thank you very much for your time.
Good to be with you.
Cheers. And there's absolutely no missing it. It's all about tax. It's tax. That's what this election is going to be all about. The Treasurer is saying you will pay more under Labor. They want to be looked at again by the Australian voter who've plainly gone off this government during all their difficulties, including yet another Prime Minister gone last year. When it comes to tax, Labor says it is still comfortable with what it's offering. And of course, that includes those changes to negative gearing treatments on property investment. I spoke to the Shadow Treasurer, Chris Bowen, just a short time ago. Chris Bowen, thanks for your time.
Great pleasure, Hugh.
Are you ready for an election on tax cuts?
I'm ready for an election on the competing economic plans of the two sides, including tax. And this government has finally caught up with Labor's plans to deliver better tax cuts to 10 million Australians earning less than $125,000, which we announced last year. I mean, 326 days late, but we welcome that. With one important exception, and it is an important issue, they've neglected those Australians earning $40,000 a year or less. Some of our lowest income earners don't receive the tax cuts as big as they should. They haven't doubled the tax cuts for them. That's deeply regrettable, and we will remedy that in our policies.
So the government says it's not going to produce any legislation on the tax cuts. They're going to take it to the people. It's going to go to an election. Had they produced it tomorrow, would you have waved through that first tranche of tax cuts?
We're fine with it, yeah.
So what about the second tranche of tax cuts, the ones that are supposed to come in?
Well, 2022, and we're less impressed. One, they're a long way away.
Well, all of them, they come in at 2024 to go.
Well, the rest come in, and tranche 3 comes in later. Now, tranche 3 is highly irresponsible. I mean, $95 billion spent on some of our highest income earners. Irresponsible, often and never. I mean, I don't know what the economy, I'd like to think I know what the economy is going to be doing in 2024, 2025, but I don't know. You don't know. Josh Frydenberg doesn't know. Pretty irresponsible to lock that sort of a big expense in, and it's not well targeted. Now, we'll support good policy, but we don't support the stage 3 tax cuts.
So to be quite clear, you are not attracted to their idea that is in this budget of reducing the tax rate down to 30% as a maximum rate for anyone earning.
Well, they'd already legislated most of that, and we opposed it at the time. They've announced some changes to that. We still think that legislating changes that far out, which are pretty poorly targeted, is highly irresponsible, very expensive and highly irresponsible.
Are you satisfied this is a real rigidage surplus?
Well, are we in surplus yet?
Well, in the coming year?
Not this year. They're still in deficit. They're forecasting a surplus. Now, that's welcome, but they haven't delivered a surplus yet.
Do you doubt it, though? Do you genuinely think the circumstances won't allow a surplus?
Well, we certainly hope not. I mean, we need a surplus in Australia, but let's just take a few seconds to break down how they got to surplus. Nearly a quarter of it is spending less on disabled people through the National Disability Scheme. Nearly a quarter of the surplus is an underspend on the National Disability Scheme. That's nothing to be proud of. The rest of it comes from a combination of high commodity prices. No decision of Scott Morrison or Josh Frydenberg led to that. And quite heroic assumptions that wages growth will leap back up.
The budget figures show that housing investment, dwelling investment, is as weak as everyone knows that it is. And the Treasurer says now is not the time to be introducing effectively what amounts to new higher tax treatments in the housing sector. Is it time to just pull that back?
Josh Frydenberg said it was the wrong time 3 years ago when the housing market was different in Sydney and Melbourne. He's always got an excuse.
But it's hardly a better time now, sure.
Well, he's already got an excuse. Now, we've got the right policies for any number of market conditions. When we design them for the long term. A number of economists actually, Hugh, have said this is a good time for negative gearing reform because investors have already left the market to a large degree. So it's a good time to adjust the policy, the tax settings for investors. It can be done more smoothly than otherwise. If investors were overheating the market, it would be a big change to change the tax treatment for investors.
So you're pressing ahead with it?
We've announced the start date, 1st of January 2020. That's our policy, and we'll seek to implement it.
What do you think will be more than anything the decisive thing in Australians' minds with a fresh budget right in their ears as they go to an election, we now presume, in just a matter of weeks?
I think the chaos and instability and cuts the last 6 years. A government without a coherent economic message. We've got the stability under Bill's leadership. We've got the policy coherence that we've put together as a team. We're ready for government.
We will know soon enough what the voters have to say. Chris Bowen, thank you.
Thank you, Hugh.
And we will know soon enough. The odds are shortening that this election will be held on May the 11th. That would see the Prime Minister going to see the Governor-General on Sunday or before Sunday. If it goes any later than that, it'll go to May the 18th. It won't get any longer than that. So we are absolutely now in the home run to that election, Sandra.
OK, Hugh, thank you. Well, as always, reaction to the budget has been swift. Business groups like it, but pensioners wanted much more. Here's Phoebe Bowden.
Sandra, coal has come through for the government. A boost in global prices for coal and iron ore has given the coalition more money to spend, and so it's offering tax cuts for low and middle income earners. But that doesn't help if you don't have a job, and despite growing arguments being made for the need to raise the New Start allowance, the government isn't budging.
The failure to lift this payment remains a wound in the nation's soul. Instead of healing this wound, the government has rubbed salt in it.
If unemployment benefits went up, the eventual cost of that to the budget would be only $1 in every $3 because the economy itself would be bigger.
If you're a pensioner, well, you're going to get one off $75.
More than $500 million for the Royal Commission into abuse of the disabled welcomed.
This is an essential Royal Commission. It's going to deliver justice for people with disability.
Small business is a winner. The instant asset write-off will raise to $30,000 a year and will go to companies turning over as much as $50 million a year.
It's been made available from tonight, so between now and the end of the financial year, that's a boost for businesses.
We grade this budget 8.5 out of 10. It's a very good budget.
A budget kind to business is in keeping with coalition tradition, but with the election coming, the Treasurer has headed into Labor territory, promising more money for mental health, cancer research and rebates. In education, there's more money for preschools and new cash incentives to boost apprenticeships, but some say it's not enough.
This money tonight does nothing to allay the concerns of our members.
People looking for a big new offering on climate change will be disappointed.
We need to spend billions to modernise our grid to take advantage of the huge renewable energy resources. They're throwing a few $million at it.
There is very little time for these major changes to be legislated, so everything effectively now rests on voters and whether they choose to give this government another go.
Thanks, Phoebe. Let's get the final word now on Budget 2019. Back to Peter Van Onselen and Hugh Riminton. First to you, Peter. Is it a winner or a fizzer?
Well, I wouldn't describe it as a fizzer. I wouldn't go that far. Certainly, they could have gone further on some of the measures that they've done. They could have, for example, actually delivered a surplus this financial year. They had a $4 billion deficit this financial year. It becomes a surplus next. They probably could have moved some things around to be able to shock and awe on the night and say, guess what, we've come in a year early. Paul Keating did something similar to that in the 1980s when he was Treasurer, and it really worked politically for him. They didn't go down that path. They want the focus to now be on economic management for the election. Now, I think that they will largely get that wish, and that will allow them to spruik the surplus, to talk about the tax cuts, even though I would be worried politically that they're perhaps not as fair as they could be because of so much getting filtered in the long run to high income earners. But putting that to one side, it's really the attacks that they will want to level on Labor and what they might do going forward in future budgets, like the negative gearing policy or the franking credits as well. So this budget was a Conservative budget. It was about establishing that tradition that Liberals have of providing surpluses and being cautious. They did do that. So Josh Frydenberg is to be commended at least on that front.
And Hugh, your thoughts, a winner or a fizzer?
Well, it reminds me a little bit of Labor in 2013 when they knew they were pretty much going to lose an election. So they made a lot of big-sounding promises about things like the NDIS and Gonski education funding. But really a lot of the cost of that was way off into the future. So if you look at the big promises, including getting rid of all national net debt by 2030, that's really the never-never. And it's based on parameters and assumptions about the economy that simply are unmeasurable at this stage. And the punters, by and large, are onto that long-term thinking. The same with their tax cuts that are due to come in 2024. There are the fairness issues anyway. But if you're attracted to them, they still seem a long way off. There's another full election before they would start to come into play. So what are we left with? We're really left with a promise that if you vote for the coalition at the next election and you're earning, say, $90,000 as a single person, you'll get a little over $1,000 back in tax returns. That looks pretty good. You think it's going to come back to me pretty soon, $1,000, maybe it's worth my vote. But Labor will move quickly to offer something which looks very much the same, and they'll neutralise that as an effect. And then voters are left saying there's not much in the short term between the two candidates. Who do I trust more after years of all kinds of political disruption, Sandra?
Thank you, Hugh. Well, I guess the voters will decide. The election is just weeks away, and of course they'll let us know at the ballot box. That is all for this special budget edition of 10 News First. Make sure you join us at 5 o'clock tomorrow night for more analysis and all the fallout. Thanks for your company tonight from the team here at 10 News First. We'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.